Hey Cozy Crew, it's Jessica with Stay Cozy Creative Co. And today we're going to be making my granny tree skirt. And so I've chosen these 4 colors for my design. And if you've seen my other videos, then you know I have a more traditional style with the green, the reds, the white, and a cashmere color. And so today I'm adding some pink in to match my pink Christmas tree that's in my studio. And it will be the same pattern that I used on the other tree skirt, and I hope that you really enjoy it. So to get started, you'll need to pick out your 4 colors that you want for your tree skirt. You'll need a good pair of scissors and then a good lighter. I like these big easy reach ones so that you don't burn your fingers and so that they aren't overly aggressive with a bigger lighter, but you can use whatever you have lying around your house. And then I'm choosing one of my favorite holiday drinks right now, which is the Poppy Cranberry Fizz. So let's get started. If you've purchased my written pattern on my website, then you can get that now. This has all the instructions as well as links to additional resources and other videos that might help you in this process. And we are ready to get started. So we're going to get started with our foundation chain, and we want it to be chain 13. So I'm going to start with a slip knot, and so you just lay your yarn over like this, you cross it over, and then on the back side you tuck a loop through. So it's kind of like tying your shoes with one lace, and you want this loop to be about 3 fingers wide. It's okay if your tail, it doesn't really matter the length of this tail, but your working yarn is what controls like the size of your loop. So if it's too small, you can make it bigger. If it's too big, you can make it smaller like this. But about 3 finger widths is what we're shooting for. So now we're going to make 12 more loops to finish out our chain. So we're just going to reach into the top of that loop, pull a new loop through, and lay it down right next to it. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you want your foundation chain to have some stretch to it. You don't want it to be too tight, and you don't want it to be too loose. So these little holes are totally fine, but if you have big gaping holes, then you'll want to tighten it up just a little bit. And so we should have 13 loops total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And now we're ready to get started on our first row. So we're going to use this last loop that we made, and we're going to make a double crochet stitch into each of our loops. So that will be 12 total. So we're going to take our loop and then wrap our yarn around our fingers and then go into that same gap or that same stitch. Pull a new loop up and through so that you have 3 on your fingers, and then pull yarn through those first 2 strands and then yarn through those second 2. So there's our first double crochet. So if you need more help with that stitch, you can find videos on my channel, or you can pause this, rewind it, and rewatch it as many times as you want. But I'm going to continue across this chain doing my double crochet stitches. And so with sizing of everything, the key is to always keep it snug. So you don't want your stitches to be too tight, because 1, it just pulls your project too tight, and then it gets really hard to get your fingers into the stitches to make your next row. But you do want them snug so that you don't have a lot of excess yarn or excess gaps or holes in your project. And then for your last double crochet, just make sure you don't forget this last loop. Sometimes it can get hidden among the other ones at the beginning. All right, so there we have finished row 1, and we can count our double crochet stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And so we are going to chain 1, and then I'm actually going to tuck this loop down and pull my beginning tail through it just to kind of secure it in place. And then I'm going to trim this, and we'll attach that at the end, but this completes our row 1. Now we're ready for row 2, and we're gonna go with our second color. So I'm gonna go with this white. And to get started, we're going to go into that gap between that final loop and our first double crochet of our row 1. And so we're going to start with a slip stitch where we just pull a loop through and put a loop on top and kind of pull that tight. And then I'm going to chain 2, so 1, 2. And then at this point, we're gonna head back this way. So if you're comfortable working with your left hand, then you can work that way. If not, then you can do what I'm doing, and that's flipping your project over. And then this will allow me to work with my right hand heading back this way. So now what we're going to do is make a puff stitch into each of the gaps in between the double crochet stitches of our previous row. So we'll end up making 11 puff stitches, and then we will mimic this beginning end at the end down here with a chain and a slip stitch to connect it. So for our puff stitch, we're doing a puff stitch to 5 strands. So that means until we have 5 strands in our fingers. So I'll show you what I mean. So I have 1 strand on my fingers. I'm going to wrap for a second strand. I'm going to go into that gap between the 2 double crochet stitches, pull my 3rd strand up and through. Then I'm going to wrap around for my 4th strand and then reach back into that gap to pull my 5th strand through. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strands on my fingers. I'm going to pull a loop. Oops. And pull a loop all the way through all 5 of those, and I'm going to chain 1. And so that completes my first puff stitch. So now I'm going to do that same thing where I do a puff stitch to 5 and then chain 1 into each of these gaps. So now we're going into our final gap between our last 2 double crochets. All right, so since we already did our 1 chain, we're going to finish off with 1 extra chain, and then we're going to do a slip stitch into this final gap of our last double crochet and this chain on the end. So we just do our slip stitch, cut our yarn, and kind of pull that snug. So you can see now the beginning and end of this second row mimics each other, and it's starting to curve in on itself. So eventually it will keep pulling a little bit where it can come all the way around, and that's why it's important for this foundation chain to have a little bit of give to it so that it's not too tight. So now we're going to turn and head back the other way for our 3rd row. So I'm going to flip my project back so I can use my right hand to go this way. Okay, so for row 3, we're going to switch colors again, and I'm going with my blush color. So we're going to find the end of our yarn. And for this row, we're going to be making a bunch of triple crochet stitches. So we're going to be going into the gap in between all of the puff stitches from our previous row. And so to get started, we're going to do a slip stitch in between this final chain and that first puff stitch of our final row. So we're going to do a slip stitch, chain 2, and then do 1 triple crochet into this same space. So here's our slip stitch. I'm going to tighten that up, and then chain 2, so 1, 2, and then for a triple crochet, we're going to wrap our yarn once, twice, so that we start with 3 strands on our fingers. We're going to go into that same gap that we started, pull a new strand through, get rid of that fluff, and then now we should have 4 strands. So then we're going to pull a new loop under these first 2 strands, and then now under these 2 strands, and then now under these last 2 strands. So that makes our triple crochet stitch, and then we're going to chain 1, and then now for the next 10 gaps, we're going to do 2 triple crochet stitches into each of these gaps. So for this first one, our chain kind of acted like our first triple crochet stitch, and then this was our second one. And now in each of these next 10 ones, we're going to do 2 triple crochet stitches. So there's 1. Oops. And here's our second. And then we're going to chain 1 and then go into our next gap. All right, so we're getting to our final gap. So this was our beginning with the chain, triple crochet, and then double. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So for this final one, we're going to do 1 triple crochet stitch. And then we're going to chain 2. And then we're going to attach into that same space with a slip stitch. So we pull that loop through and then pull it to the back, trim our yarn, and then put that tail through that final loop. So that mimics our final one. And there, looks like a beautiful rainbow, but we're only part of the way there. So we are done with our row 3. All right, now for row 4, we're going to switch our yarn again, and I'm going with this burnt red color. So since I just finished up on this side, I'm going to be working back this way. So I'm going to turn my project, and I'm going to kind of just work on it this way so I can go using my right hand again. So to get started with this row, we're going to do a slip stitch between that final triple crochet and that chain to get started. So we're going to find that gap, pull our loop up and through. Sometimes I like to cross this yarn just so it holds itself in place a little bit better. So there's our slip stitch. And then we're going to chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now for this row, we are going to do a cluster stitch into each of these gaps in between 2 of the triple crochets. So here, and then here, and then here. And so a cluster stitch, we're gonna work until we have 6 strands on our fingers. So I'll show you how this works. So you start with 1 strand on your fingers, wrap once, go into that gap, and then you're going to pull yarn through those first 2 strands. And now we're starting with 2 strands on our fingers. So we're gonna wrap, go into that same gap again, pull up, and then pull a loop through those first 2 strands. So now we start with 3 strands on our fingers. So we're gonna wrap the yarn, go into that same gap again. Now we have 5 strands, so we're gonna pull a loop through both of those 2. Now we're starting with 4 strands. So we're gonna wrap that yarn, go into that same gap again, pull another strand through, and now you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strands. So that's when we know that we're gonna pull the yarn all the way through. And then we're going to chain 3. So we do 1, 2, 3. So that was our first cluster stitch. So that takes quite a bit of yarn, but as you can see, it fills out that space really nicely, and it gives just a little bit different texture than the other stitches do. So it helps give just like some contrast and more interest to our piece. So now we're going to do the same thing into this next gap over here. So we're going to wrap our yarn, go into that gap, pull up. Okay, hold on. Okay, let's try this again. So we're going to wrap our yarn, go into the gap, pull up, pull through those first 2, then do the same thing again. So really with a cluster stitch, it's like you're just doing the same motion over and over until you get to the 6 strands on your fingers. So here we're at 5, and here's 6. So then we're going to pull that all the way through, and then chain 1, 2, 3, and go into our next one. So I know that this stitch can be kind of tricky. So you basically are going into that same gap 4 times. All right, so I finished with that same chain 3. I'm gonna add 1 more chain to mimic that chain 4 that we did in the beginning, and then I'm gonna go into that gap between the triple crochet stitch and the chain of the last row. I'm going to do a slip stitch, so that loop, and flip it through, cut my yarn, and then put that tail through that loop and kind of pull it to cinch it there. And we are done with row 4. So you can see how it continues to come around. Ideally, this is gonna kind of cover up that base of our Christmas tree, so it's okay that it kind of like puckers up like that a little bit. And I just love how this is coming together. Had just enough yarn to finish that row. And now we're gonna head back the other way for row 5. Okay, so we are ready for row 5, and we are back to our first color since we're alternating. And I have just about this much left of the green, and then I had a smaller skein of green that I'm going to use. So I'll show you how to connect those when I get to that point. But to get started, since we're going to work our way back that way. I'm going to use my right hand. I'm going to kind of work like this so it's easier for me to see. We're going to go attach our yarn in between this last chain and that cluster stitch. So grab your yarn. And we're going to do a slip stitch here like we've been doing to connect it. And actually, how about I work this? Yeah, I'll do this. So we're gonna do the slip stitch and then we're gonna chain 2. And then we're going to do a double crochet into that same gap. And then we're going to chain 2. And then now into each of our gaps in between all of our cluster stitches, we're going to do 4 double crochet stitches and then do chain 2 in between each of those. So we're going to do that all the way around. So there's 1. There's 2. There's 3. And there's 4. We're going to chain 2, 1, 2. And you can see how that kind of fills it in nicely because again, our goal is for this to lay flat. We don't want it pulling in or flopping in on itself because we're trying to grow this around as best we can. All right, so now we're back to our final gap, and again, like we do in every row, we're going to mimic the beginning. So we're going to do 1 double crochet stitch into here, and then we're going to make a chain. So we will do our double crochet stitch, and then chain 2, and then slip stitch to connect. And the nice thing about doing the 2 at the beginning and the end is that it kind of mimics, or it does mimic the pattern all the way around. So when they lay by each other, it will look very natural and as close to seamless as we can do. So congrats, we're done with round 5. All right, now on to row 6. So I'm gonna turn this around because I want to be working this way, and we are going back to our white chenille yarn for this round. And to get started, we are going to go into the gap between our chain and double crochet stitch of row 5. So we're going to connect it with our slip stitch. And then chain 2. So 1, 2. And then as we did with our other white row, we're going to do puff stitches. And so this row is going to be a little different than our other ones because it's not going to be the exact same all the way around, but there will just be slight variations. So in between any of these gaps here that are in between our double crochet stitch, like clusters kind of. We're going to do a puff stitch until we have the 5 strands on our fingers, just like we did down here. And then we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to do another puff stitch into that same gap. And then we'll chain 2, and then we're going to do 1 puff stitch in between the 2nd and 3rd double crochets of these clumps, and then chain 2, and then go back to doing the puff stitch, chain 1, puff stitch. So it's kind of like alternating that pattern so that we fill in these gaps really well and that we aren't pulling our pattern too tightly together. Okay, so to do our first puff stitch, we're going to go into here. And remember, with the puff stitch, we go until we have all 5 strands on our fingers. So there's our 5 strands. We'll pull our yarn through, and we'll chain 1, and then we're going to do another puff stitch. I need to undo that yarn into the same gap here. So pull all of the way through, and then we're going to chain 2, so 1, 2, and then do a puff stitch in between these double crochets. And then chain 2. Oops. And then now, since we're back to one of these big gaps, we'll do 2 of the puff stitches into here. So there's 1 puff stitch, chain 1, and then our 2nd puff stitch. So we'll just continue this way all the way around row 6. All right, so this is our final gap that will include 2 of the puff stitches. So there's 1, chain 1, and here's our 2nd one. I'm going to chain 2, and then we're going to do a slip stitch in between that final double crochet and chain of row 5. So slip stitch, pull that, loop around back, snip our yarn, tuck that tail in, and there we are, done with row 6. And I should say, if at this point you're like, oh, I love this, this is big enough for my tree, you can totally stop here. And honestly, you can stop at any row that you want, but for my tree, I want it to be a little bit bigger, and I want to have the option to show you guys how to make a bigger tree skirt. So you're welcome to customize it for whatever you need for your tree, but we have a few more rows to go. So here, let's count the double puff stitches and then the single ones. So I believe that we should have 11 of these double ones and then 10 of the single. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of the double, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the single. And then we have these connecting chains at the end. So there we are. Time for row 7. Okay, so time for row 7, and for this row, if you remember with this color, we did a bunch of triple crochet stitches, and it's going to be the same for this row. So to get started, we're going to do a slip stitch to connect everything in between this final chain and that puff stitch. we got our slip stitch, and then we're gonna chain 2. So 1, 2, and then, so this is getting big, so it's getting tricky. I'm gonna pull this down here so hopefully it's easier to see. And then we're gonna do a triple crochet stitch into this same gap here. And then we're gonna chain 1. And then now in between every puff stitch, so that means like there's 2 here, we're gonna go in between here underneath that 1 chain. We're gonna do 2 triple crochet stitches. So 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and also chain 2, or sorry, and also chain 1. So we already did our chain, so we're gonna do our triple crochet. So we'll do, here's our first triple crochet, and then here's our second. And then we will chain 1. So basically like your chain 1 is gonna go over that puff stitch, and then your 2 triple crochets will go into the gaps between your puff stitches. So 2 triple crochets, chain 1. So now 2 more triple crochets. Chain 1. All right, so to mimic the beginning, going into our last gap, we're going to do 1 triple crochet, and then we'll chain 2, and then slip stitch into that same gap to connect this. And congratulations, that was a lot of work. We're done with row 7. All right, we are to row 8, and I'm guessing that I'm gonna need 2 full skeins for this row. And so since we ended up here last time, now I'm going to work around this way. So we're gonna connect our yarn in between that final chain and triple crochet with a slip stitch, and then chain 3. So 1, 2, 3. And then now we're going to make a bunch of cluster stitches. So with the red, remember we did the cluster stitches down here, and in that row we made them until we had 6 strands on our fingers. This time we're only going to do it until we have 5 strands on our fingers. So since we have so many more in this row, we just don't need them to be quite as big. And so I'll show you what that looks like. So we're going to start with the 1 strand, wrap our 2nd strand, go into that gap in between the that first chain and triple crochet, and then these next 2 triple crochets. So we have 3 on our fingers. You pull your loop through those first 2. So now you start with 2 on your fingers, wrap around for 3, reach in. Now you have 4, pull through. So now you're starting with 3, wrap around, reach in. Now you have 5. So basically you're just doing 1 less step for this cluster stitch. So you're going to do that and then chain 2. So 1, 2, and we're going to do that same cluster stitch in between each pair of triple crochets. So we have these 2, then we have a gap, and then we have these 2 and then a gap. So our cluster stitch will go in these gaps, and then our chain 2 will go kind of right over the top of these triple crochets. So let me show you that cluster stitch again. So you have one strand on, wrap it around once, reach into the gap, pull another strand through, pull your yarn through those first 2 loops. So now you have 2 strands on your fingers, wrap that around for 3, reach in for 4, pull that loop through the first 2. So now you're starting with 3, wrap around for 4, reach in for 5, and then you pull your yarn all the way through those 5 strands, and then chain 2, and we will continue all the way around. So I think that we end up having 33 of these cluster stitches, so it's quite a bit, but as you can see, it totally makes an impact on this tree skirt, and I think you're gonna love the way that it looks. All right, there's one chain, and we need a new skein of yarn. And after that final one, we're going to do our chain 2, and then we're going to add 1 extra chain, so a total of 3, and then do a slip stitch in between that triple crochet and chain of the previous row. And there we have it. Barely any yarn left, just about exactly 2 skeins. And you can see that our tree skirt is laying very nicely and round. And let's count those cluster stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. Okay, so I was wrong. We only have 32, not 33. And congratulations, we're done with row 8, and our final row is our border. And so again, at any point you're welcome to stop if you like the way this looks, which actually I really do like how this looks, but I think I'm going to finish it off with the green border to kind of really bring it all together. And for our border, we're just going to do a simple single crochet stitching all the way around to kind of finish it off. All right, we are ready for our final row, and this is going to be our border all the way around this tree skirt. So since we ended here, we're going to begin on this end and then work our way around. So I'm going back to my green to finish off my pattern, and we're going to go into this top part right in between the chain and this cluster stitch. So like we have always before, we're going to attach our new yarn with a slip stitch. And then we're going to do a single crochet stitch into that same spot. So we're going to reach into that gap, pull a loop up and around, and then finish off that stitch. So our pattern for going all the way around this row is going to be a single crochet stitch into the top part of each of these cluster stitches, and then 2 single crochet stitches in between each of the cluster stitches. So since this is the beginning, our first slip stitch kind of acted as our first single crochet stitch, and then we had 1 single crochet stitch. So now we're going to go into this top loop. So if you can see, there's like a loop that's right in the center of the cluster stitch from before, and so that's the one that we're gonna go into on our way around. So if it looks confusing where you're like, oh, there's 2 of them, this one actually comes into the gap. So this is the one that is fully in the center of the cluster stitch, and then this one also covers that gap. So this is the loop that we're going to be going into. So on this first one, it's this loop right here. So for that single crochet stitch, we're going to go under both of those strands, pull our yarn through, and finish our stitch. So now in the gap in between, we're going to do 2 single crochet stitches. So into that gap, pull it through. So there's 1, and then same gap, there's 2. And we're just going to continue this pattern all the way around this row. All right, so now to finish out this row, we're going to do the same thing we did in the beginning. So in this last gap, we're going to do 1 single crochet stitch, and then we're just going to do a slip stitch to connect it. And only a little bit left to spare. Congratulations. We have made our full granny tree skirt, and it looks amazing. You did an amazing job. I can't wait to see yours. Please tag me in any of your photos. And before we're done, the only thing that's left is to connect all of these ends. So now I know some people really like to weave them in, which you totally can do, but I am more of a fan of cutting and securing the ends with the lighter. So I'm going to do that next. So to secure the ends, I'm going to flip my tree skirt over, and I'm going to do one side at a time. So my goal is to have the least number of kind of like attachment points possible. So I'm going to just find the ones that are right by each other. So like this green and red one are going to attach, this white and blush one are going to attach, this green and red are going to attach, this white and blush are going to attach, and then these 2 green are going to attach. So it should just be the ones that are right next to each other. Each of the new rows should attach to each other. But I'm just going to trim these. You really don't need a lot of yarn. You just need enough where you can kind of turn them to reach each other and attach. And then you also want to make sure while you do this that all of your ends are kind of snug. So like this blush one had a little extra yarn, so I'm just going to tighten that up and then trim these. And if you saw with that one, the white yarn did not catch on fire, but honestly, as long as that centerpiece heats up enough so that it can melt to the other one, it should be fine. But both sides do need to be hot, otherwise they will not singe together. So see here, like with this green one, there's just like a little extra yarn around that slip stitch that we made. So tightening that up first. if you follow me on any of my social channels, then you know that these Bic Easy Reach lighters are my favorite. They're kind of like the perfect size where you can use them one-handed, and this extra length is nice so that you aren't burning your thumb. Those larger lighters totally work, but they sometimes can just like be very aggressive with their flame. So you just have to be careful with them so that you don't burn your yarn. All right, and then the last one on this side. So this is really the only place I find that this matters, but instead of bringing the green up to the red, since this is down here, kind of like pulling the red down to meet the green, if that makes sense, just so like the colors seem to overlap in a similar way as the pattern of the tree skirt. Wow, this red yarn is very fluffy, so finding that center is a little trickier. There it is, because that's really what we want to catch on fire, is the center, not really the outside fluffy part. And there we go. We're done with this side. You can throw your scraps to the side, save them if you're like me, or throw them away. And careful not to burn yourself like I did, because this yarn gets hot. And we have made it officially to the end of our granny tree skirt tutorial. And I am obsessed with this pattern. I love these colors and how they came together. Like I said, I would love to see your finished tree skirts around your trees and see the colors that you chose. I hope that you love this so much, and I'm going to show you what it looks like on my tree right now. But before then, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you aren't already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and do that. At the button below, you can get access to all of my tutorials and my tips and tricks and other hand knitting and hand crochet inspiration. And maybe share this tutorial with a friend if you think that they'll like it. So let's go see how it looks on the tree. All right, so we have our finished tree skirt, and I'm going to put it around my super tall pink tree in my studio. And I love it so much. All right, so here's a close-up, and I'm so happy with my color choices. It looks so nice with my pink tree. Here's the back where you can see it overlaps, and it looks like a complete skirt all the way around. And I just love it so much. So that's the end of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, I'm Jessica with Stay Cozy Creative Co. And until next time, stay cozy, creative, and kind.